Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hypersonic 55 and I'm coming to you with another film review, and this film review is a very, very important one. Today I'm going to give you my review of The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I happen to be a massive Spider-Man fan and I love everything to do with Spider-Man. So when this film was announced, I was very, very curious about it because, you know, Spider-Man 4 was meant to come out at one point, but then it got cancelled, and then this film was supposedly meant to be made, and I was like, what? Come on, I really wanted Spider-Man 4. But after watching the production videos and interviews with the cast and crew, and then seeing all the subsequent trailers that kept getting better and better, I was like, you know what, The Amazing Spider-Man could be fun. So I went to see it on opening night, and you know what, it was pretty darn good, and I'm going to tell you why in this review. So the story of The Amazing Spider-Man is something that we have seen before, but it's done in a slightly different way. Here we have the origin story of Peter Parker, how he happens to be a kid in high school who happens to get bitten by a spider and then gains his superpowers. However, the way in which he gets bitten and the way in which all of the actions that transpire in his life before and after he becomes Spider-Man is completely different from what we've seen. In the film, we also happen to have Gwen Stacy in the mix as well, and the film happens to follow how those two form a relationship. And we also see how Peter Parker happens to make a connection with Dr. Kirk Connors, who eventually becomes the Lizard. The story in The Amazing Spider-Man is a pretty good one. It finds a way to take the origin story that we know from the previous Spider-Man films and the comic book material, but jazz it up in a way for a modern audience. It has the right amount of humor, drama, emotion. It has elements of the original comic books. It also has elements of the Ultimate Comics in there, and it has its own unique interpretation of the Spider-Man origin, all mixed into one film. And overall, it's pretty cool. So now let's move on to the characters of The Amazing Spider-Man. Now let's talk about Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. He was fabulous in this film. He brought a lot of great charm, wit, and likability to his character. This is the Peter Parker that I think a lot of people were hoping to see in a Spider-Man film. He's smart, he's relatable, and in this film they sort of updated his character. They've taken elements from the Amazing Comics, the Ultimate Comics, but they've also sort of updated his character for modern times, and it works amazingly well in this film. And there's another fabulous performance that comes in the shape of Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. She was just lovely in this film. She embodied all of the good qualities that come with Gwen Stacy's character. She's smart, she's nice, she's sweet, and it also helps that Emma Stone is just one of the most beautiful people ever. I love her, and she was just great in the movie. Her and Andrew Garfield has some great chemistry. Their scenes work so well, bar a few bits of questionable dialogue. Otherwise, those two were great. They were fabulous, and it was just working on all levels. It was great. And I also want to go back and give a good shout out to Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben and Sally Field as Aunt May. Martin Sheen's version of Uncle Ben happens to be the sort of quintessential version of what I would expect from him. He sort of has elements of the Ultimate Comics in him as well. He seems to be a really good father figure for Peter Parker, but he also seems to be rough when he needs to be as well. And his death in this film, I felt, was a little bit more dramatic than it was in the Sam Raimi film. And Sally Field's version of Aunt May again seems to embody some of the elements of the Ultimate Comics as well. She's a sweet old lady that does worry about Peter all the time, but she also seems to be assertive when she needs to be. Also, Rhys Ifans as Dr. Kirk Connors / the Lizard was pretty cool. As Dr. Kirk Connors, I thought he was really interesting. He was a smart and sympathetic character, and I really liked the way that he portrayed him. He was slightly different to the way in which he was in the comics. And while the Lizard was pretty cool, I wasn't overly keen on it. It was a decent version of the Lizard, but because the Lizard was one of my favorite characters in the Spider-Man comics, he just wasn't portrayed in the same way that I would like him to be. The same could be said for some of the elements of Kirk Connors, but otherwise Rhys Ifans does a good job. And the rest of the cast do well in their respective roles. Now, when it comes to the presentation of The Amazing Spider-Man, I think everyone can agree that it was friggin' sweet as hell. While CGI and special effects have been taken to, I think, as far as they can go at this current point in time, The Amazing Spider-Man still finds ways to go about and use the special effects to its advantage and create some really impressive action and fight sequences. The fight scenes between Spider-Man and the Lizard is literally just insane. The way in which they come up with these creative, well choreographed fight sequences is literally just insane. The way in which Spider-Man uses his environment this time round is so much more creative and useful than some of the stuff that we saw in the Sam Raimi films. And while the Sam Raimi films helped go about and show us what Spider-Man could do, I think The Amazing Spider-Man has found ways to take those sort of CGI aspects that we've seen before and take them in new and interesting directions. I just thought it was fantastic. Though the Lizard happens to look a bit questionable at times, overall the CGI is great. The cinematography in this film happens to be pretty darn good as well. Everything about the buildings from like daytime to nighttime and the way in which the film is shot just seems to have this massive vastness about it. The look of the film just happens to be really cool. And the use of practical effects as well is really cool. The fact that they happen to get Andrew Garfield to do all of his own stunts, from the web slinging in and out of the costume, that was great. And the way in which they arranged the fight sequences for Andrew Garfield to go about and fight through the robbers and do all the skateboarding and all of his training before he became Spider-Man was just great. All of the stuff that Andrew Garfield does make the film feel a little bit more realistic and natural. And while the visual side of the film is good, I feel that the only lacking thing is the score done by James Horner. Now don't get me wrong, the score wasn't overly bad, it just wasn't as impressive as I'd hoped it would be. I mean, there were certain moments where in the truly emotional scenes where drama was going down, it was really, really good. When Spider-Man's web slinging through the city and you got the music on a high, it is really good. But overall, I just felt like the film score just didn't stay with me like the way in which Danny Elfman's score stayed with me after the first two Spider-Man films. I guess the main question is now, is The Amazing Spider-Man better than the original? And in a lot of ways, yeah, it is. I guess the main reasons why The Amazing Spider-Man works is that they're having to take a little bit more time to develop Peter Parker's character in the high school section. There is a much deeper and more involved relationship between Peter and Gwen than there was with Mary Jane and Peter in the first film. And the way in which they happen to develop Spider-Man's powers with Peter outside of the costume and the way in which he fights inside of the costume just happens to be a little bit more intuitive, natural, and more in line with the comic book source material as well. And the way in which the story's been modernized and reworked in The Amazing Spider-Man just happens to feel a little bit more natural and cool. Though I reckon that there are a few aspects that were done a little better in the original Spider-Man film in terms of some of the action and the whole blockbuster / comic book feel was a little bit more impressive in my opinion in the Sam Raimi film. I guess I'm in the minority about that. I do love the Sam Raimi films, and in my opinion, I still reckon that Spider-Man 2 is the best Spider-Man film out of the set, but this is a pretty close second, to be honest. I know that there will probably be loads of people out there that will say that this is the best Spider-Man film in existence. However, I will not follow the crowd. I will say that The Amazing Spider-Man is a great Spider-Man film, but still won't replace my love for Spider-Man 2. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, The Amazing Spider-Man is a pretty darn good movie. It has a lovely story to tell, it has great performances from Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, and I feel like this is the sort of Peter Parker character that I think a lot of people have been waiting to see in a film format. While I still don't feel it's as good as Spider-Man 2, and this film definitely won't replace my love for the Avengers, I still reckon that Spider-Man will resonate with a whole load of people. It's a great summer film, and yeah, I think I will have to go back and see it another 2 times before I pass judgment. But at the moment, I think I'm going to have to give the film about a 7.5 out of 10. A lot of people may hate that rating, but you know, that's just the way I feel. So that's been my review, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you found it informative and look forward to the next one. And yeah, let me know what you thought about the movie as well. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out, yo.